Major funding for Marcia Adams' Heartland Cooking is provided by Souder Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman. With more than 50 years' experience, Souder provides ready-to-assemble furniture for today's home and office. By Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles. By Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees. Chef quality you can count on.
Hello and welcome to Heartland Cooking. Are you familiar with the song, Shuffle Off to Buffalo? Well, I'm not sure it's an appropriate song title anymore. I think it ought to be renamed Run Off to Buffalo. And I mean to the meat, not the city. Health-conscious consumers, as well as foodies in the quest of new taste sensations, find themselves lining up at the meat counters and asking, any buffalo roast today? There are more buffalo grazing in the fields now than there have been since the 1800s, when the white man's demand for buffalo pelts and tongues nearly wiped those animals out. This first recipe, as you might guess, is a buffalo dish, and we're going to prepare it as a sauerbraten with ginger snap sauce, not gingerbread sauce. Now, sauerbraten is really a German dish, and it uses a 4-day wine vinegar marinade. And the sauce is traditionally thickened with gingersnap cookies. It's a really highly flavored dish. You may have made it with beef, but today it's with buffalo. We're going to start by making the marinade. And you begin by combining several ingredients in a medium bowl. A teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of pepper. And then these nice vegetables for additional flavor. 2 medium onions sliced, a celery stalk chopped, and 1 carrot sliced. The spices are intriguing and of course add to the flavor. 2 bay leaves, 4 whole cloves, 8 whole allspice, a teaspoon of dry mustard, and a half teaspoon each of celery seed, dried thyme, and mace. Put all that in. And then to this, we're going to add 2 cups of red wine vinegar. This is going to be so good. And during this 4-day period, these vegetables are going to soak right down into that red wine vinegar and make the marinade just be absolutely delicious. Let's talk about allspice a bit, because we've not had the whole allspice used before on the show. Allspice is a pea-sized berry of the evergreen pimento tree, which grows in South America and Jamaica. It ordinarily comes ground, and it's called allspice because it does indeed taste like a combination of cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon. It's used in both desserts and in savory mixtures like the one we're doing today. Now here's how I like to do a marinade. Start with a 2-gallon plastic bag and put in it approximately a 4-pound buffalo rump roast, or really any other kind of buffalo cut you can get, because sometimes you don't have a real big selection. And put that right here in this plastic sack. I think this works much better than doing it in a bowl. And you should never, incidentally, use a metal pan for this kind of a marinade, because the acid will interact with the metal. And then just add all that marinade to the plastic sack. Wasn't that simple? Now squeeze out most of the air and seal it well, right down the ceiling. And then return this whole thing to a flat dish. And I would use, again, a plastic dish. Now I'll tell you why you do this. You can't trust that these plastic sacks aren't going to leak. And I know that seems conservative to you, but it's easier than cleaning up the mess in your refrigerator. It is conservative, I'll agree. It's sort of like being a banker. They say only bankers wear both suspenders and belts. Well, this is the same sort of thing. You don't want that mess in your refrigerator. Save yourself one. So put this glass dish back into the refrigerator for 4 days. Now, the reason you have a 4-day period is because the acid in vinegar acts as a tenderizer. And turn this twice a day for 4 days. And then at the end of 4 days, remove the roast from the marinade and brown it in a roasting pan in a tablespoon of butter and a tablespoon of oil until it's brown on both sides. Then take the reserved marinade that the buffalo was in all those 4 days and pour it all over the meat, including the vegetables. And get those vegetables down there in the sauce as well. Now cover this tightly and bake it at 300 degrees for 4 hours or until it's fork tender. And that might vary a bit because I can't tell you exactly how tender that buffalo is going to be. Just you have to use your own judgment on some of these things. Now, to finish up the sauerbraten, remove the meat to a heated platter. And this is what buffalo looks like. It looks really much like roast beef, as you can see. It's a very fine grained meat. I think it's a little bit sweeter and a little bit blander. It lends itself very well to highly seasoned dishes like these sauerbratens. Then, in a saucepan, I want you to make a roux using 5 tablespoons of margarine and 2.5 tablespoons of flour. And to that, add all of the pan juices that the sauerbraten was cooking in. And I'm going to have to hustle here. And then bring that to a boil and let it thicken. And then we're going to add some more wonderful things to this. Stir in 2 tablespoons of sugar and 2 tablespoons of molasses, like this. And there we are. I'm trying to get this to speed up. Watch pot never boils. That cliche is certainly true. And then approximately a half a dozen of crumbled gingersnap cookies. You see, this is really going to thicken it up. And when I say gingersnap cookies, I mean these old-fashioned kind, just like you used to eat with milk. And then we're going to add a half a cup of raisins. Now let this thicken up until it's nicely done. And we are going to then place the thickened sauce over the top of the buffalo. Now, buffalo, properly called bison, is being raised by a growing number of ranchers and farmers. We're going to visit one later on in the show. This meat is available in some grocery stores and by special order. And since it has a lower fat content than beef, it should be cooked at a lower temperature than beef or it does become tough. Look at this sauce. It's thickened up, sweet and sour, with the whole allspice in there. It's just going to be delicious on this sauerbraten. Now pour some over the top, and you're going to have a most attractive, unusual dish. Just like that. Doesn't it look good? The German, of course, Germans are sweet and sour. Germans are famous for their sweet and sour sauce. There, I got that out right. Then toss a little bit of parsley on top. Now, this is a real feisty entree with a spicy sauce that's laced with ginger snaps. I certainly hope that you'll try it. At one time, our plains were black with buffalo. That would have been a beautiful sight, I think. But by 1910, only 254 of these animals existed in the entire world, and one of those was in a zoo in Calcutta. Today, there are about 100,000 of these shaggy, black-maned, impressive beasts, and they are impressive. They're once again roaming around our country. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we did visit a buffalo farm in central Indiana to observe a domestic buffalo operation. Buffalo meat is appearing more and more on upscale restaurant menus all over the United States, and recipes for it are appearing more and more in gourmet magazines. In Warsaw, Indiana, is a buffalo ranch, Barbie Buffalo Ranch, and Tom Mays has a herd. And we're in his beautiful kitchen that overlooks the meadows below where many, many buffalo roam, if you'll excuse that pun. And Tom, why are we hearing more about buffalo today?
Well, basically because it's lower in fat content and cholesterol.
Both of those things.
Both.
So with our health-conscious public wanting these kind of meats, buffalo is becoming popular.
Very popular.
Does it taste like beef?
It tastes almost exactly like beef, except it's a tad sweeter.
I see. Now here we have frozen examples that you brought up from your freezer, and I see T-bones and chuck roasts and ground round ribeyes, all the cuts that we associate with beef.
Right.
And would we prepare it the way we prepare beef?
Almost the same way, except you cook it slower and with lower heat.
a long period of cooking time and at a very low temperature.
True.
Ordinarily. All right. How did you get started in the buffalo business? Because I think it's really offbeat.
Well, several years ago, I had a friend that had a herd, and I wanted one, so we worked out a deal, and I got my first one. Well, within a few days, I found out that I needed more than one because it ran away, and I had to catch it, and it just needed a companion. So soon we bought 2 or 3 more, and we had no problem from then on.
Now, how big is your herd today?
18.
18. Are you breeding all the time to make the herd larger?
Well, I have been, but we're almost to the capacity that I want to be at right now. I could have up to 25 to 30 maximum, but on a revolving basis.
And you're going to have some babies this spring,
I should
you told
have
me.
9 babies very shortly.
Oh, that would be so exciting. Now, are they a pleasant animal to be around? Are they wild, or are they like cows in their temperament?
No, they're very docile, but you don't trust them.
Because they're wild.
Because they are wild. They are a wild animal. You always have means of escape if they decide to check you out or charge you.
All right, how do you feed them then?
Well, I feed them, in the winter I give them grain, and there's always a fence between me and the animal, and we just toss the grain into a trough. In the winter we use the truck, and we haul hay out and fill the bunkers, but we also have the truck as a safety.
So you could jump into it if,
Oh,
if
yes.
they suddenly decided to become
Right,
natural
right.
charging
But
buffalo.
they very seldom do that, but they have done it.
And so you're just being prudent.
Right.
What is the age of a buffalo when it's butchered?
Between 2.5 and 3.5
Years.
years old.
I see. Now that's more mature, is it not, than a
Well,
cow?
that's true, because it takes twice as long for a buffalo to mature as it does a cow.
Interesting.
It's estimated there are now about 60,000 buffalo in the U.S. and another 20,000 in Canada, a far cry from those early days. One writer wrote of the buffalo, "The plains were black and appeared as if it were in motion." However, buffalo are becoming once again a central part of the lives of a handful of ranchers scattered about the Midwest.
It's obvious that Tom Mays is really enthusiastic about working with these animals and being part of their comeback. I don't blame him. The next recipe is one of my favorites because it uses 2 indigenous Midwestern ingredients, Michigan navy beans and Indiana buffalo sausage. And you know how I feel about using regional foods. It's the thing to do. Appropriately, this soup is called Michigan bean and buffalo sausage soup. And the recipe is from the Row Inn in Michigan. Now, this is close to the town of Petoskey, but it's even closer to the little town of Ellsworth. You kind of have to get a map and ask some folks how to find it, but do stop at the Row Inn if you're up there. Now, to make this soup, you want to soak 1 1/3 cups of dried Michigan navy beans overnight in water to cover. Now, that means several inches above the top of the dried beans because they will absorb a lot of that water. The next day, drain off the excess water and set the beans aside, but leave them in the pot. See what they look like when they're all ready to go? These are the pre-soaked beans. Then, in a large skillet, saute a pound of buffalo sausage. And if you can't get buffalo sausage, you can use a Polish kielbasa. And dice this first in your food processor. Saute it and set it aside. But then, in the same skillet, where you have all those good pan drippings from the sausage, saute 2 cups each of diced onions, carrots, and celery. And saute these until they're a little bit crunchy and still a little bit soft. You know what I mean. You can see that they've kept their form. Now, to this, add a 28-ounce can of undrained plum tomatoes that have been seeded and chopped, and mix that all in together. And to the beans, then, that are here in this empty pot, we're going to cook those in 2 quarts of chicken stock. And I hope it's homemade, people, because that's the very best of all. And then we're going to add the following seasonings. 2½ teaspoons of dried thyme. That is a very excellent herb to use with beans, incidentally. 2 bay leaves, a teaspoon of salt, and ½ teaspoon of pepper. And then to the bean mixture, we're going to add the vegetables and the reserved sausage. And mix that all together. Just this simple. And cover and simmer this for 2 hours, checking every now and then to see if the beans are tender. They may be done in an hour, and this depends totally on the age of those dried beans. Now, when this is finished, it makes about 12 servings, and admittedly, that's a lot of soup. So you might want to freeze half of it and serve it for another time. It's a beautiful soup and very hearty. Here we have a finished one. This is a sturdy, zesty soup, and it's simply delicious, served with hot biscuits, or even something a little fancier, a cornbread madeleine with a touch of sage. All of our Midwestern states have a very rich Native American heritage, and those Indians were all fine hunters, and game was an important part of their diet. Today, game hunting is one of Michigan's most popular sports, and wild deer is really considered a prized trophy by hunters and cooks alike. Properly cooked venison with its fine-grained flesh and its real distinctive flavor is really wonderful eating. Now today we're going to do a venison roast with a carrot and rosemary sauce. And it too is going to be marinated for 4 days, just like we did the buffalo. Venison is like buffalo in that it's a lean meat without much marbling. And it really benefits from a marinade, which helps tenderize it. Now, to marinate the meat, and again, now this is venison, and a dear friend of mine by the name of Skip Haberler brings this back to me every year from Wyoming. You put the venison roast, and it can be any kind, into another plastic sack, which I think is the best way to do this. And then we're going to pour over it a combination of 1 cup of dry red wine, not vinegar, dry red wine, and a cup of water, and 3 garlic cloves. Now, this is a much simpler, see they're sort of partially cut up. This is a simpler marinade, as you can see. And close up the bag and put it back in that dish to marinate for 4 days, and turn the bag a couple of times a day. Now, at the end of 4 days, drain the marinade into a slow cooker and brown the meat on all sides in your oven, under the oven broiler, for about 20 to 30 minutes. And I would suggest you do this about 7 inches from the heat. Now, I wanted to show you this alternative way to brown meat because it is a low-calorie way to brown meat because you've added no other fat. So this is really kind of a low-calorie dish. And here is our venison roast. Now, transfer this to the slow cooker and to the marinade, like this. And we're going to add some other good things to it. 6 medium carrots cut in 1-inch pieces, 1 medium onion coarsely chopped, and 2 celery stalks. And just put that right in there. Get it down in the juices. And then we're going to add these intriguing spices. 2 bay leaves and a teaspoon of ground cumin and half a teaspoon of dried rosemary. Sprinkle that in. Now cover and cook this for 10 hours or until the roast is fork tender. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. But first, I wanted to discuss rosemary a bit because that's the major herb we used in this dish today. This is a very unusually aromatic herb, and because of that, that's why I chose it to use with this venison dish, because venison can be strong flavored, and the rosemary matches it pretty equally. It's also used in lamb dishes for the same reason, or with mutton dishes. The plant itself is native to the Mediterranean, and the bushes there grow very tall and very beautiful. And if you are, for instance, in Greece, when they are in bloom, the whole countryside smells of rosemary. It's really a great experience. Here in the Midwest, however, they're considerably smaller. We grow them as window plants, and we can move them outside in the summer. It's a member of the mint family, though you wouldn't dream of that to look at it. And years and years ago, they made tea and used it to cure numerous ailments. I'm not sure it was successful, but anyway, that's what they used. Its flavor is really dusky and lemonish with a touch of pine and nutmeg. And you may recall that it's mentioned in Ophelia's mad scene in Hamlet. And she says, here's rosemary. That's for remembrance. And it's always been an emblem of, say, constancy, which is the irony of it because we all know that Hamlet was not constant. Anyway, the dried leaves are very coarse. See this? And they should be pounded in a mortar and pestle like this if you are using them in a quick dish, a quick cook dish. Now, enough of a lecture on rosemary. Now, after this meat has cooked 10 hours, remove the meat from the cooker and keep it warm. and transfer the whole cooking mixture that was in here to a medium saucepan. And then to that, we're going to add a tablespoon of lemon juice and a teaspoon of Worcestershire and a half a teaspoon of salt and a fourth teaspoon of pepper, and bring that to a boil. And then we're going to make a cornstarch thickening mixture of 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and a fourth of a cup of water, and add that to the boiling liquid and let it thicken up. The carrots stay together, of course, and they add a lot of sweetness to this dish. By the 19th century, venison was really a common meat in large city markets, but then it fell out of fashion. So it's really interesting to see the renewed interest in venison now in the 20th century. We find it in the most elegant restaurants, and people with allergies to red meat sometimes can eat venison when they cannot eat beef or pork. Now, as I mentioned earlier, venison is a lean meat without much marbling, and it lends itself well to braising and low temperatures like we did today. This is doing great guns here. Okay, now we're going to serve this lovely dish. And I might add to you, here that the length of time, I mentioned 10 hours, it might take a little bit longer because the tenderness of a deer varies tremendously from animal to animal. I don't know how many fences that deer jumped over or how many cars he jumped in front of, but at any rate, it varies. So just use your fork test to see if that venison is done. Now we're going to pour over the carrot rosemary sauce. And this actually could be served in a vegetable bowl on the side. Isn't that pretty? I like it a lot. Let me see, there's another line from Ophelia's Mad Scene, something about pansies being for thought. We're really Shakespearean today with this venison and buffalo, aren't we? This is altogether a delectable roast, and it's zapped with cumin and rosemary. And you're going to think it's great for entertaining too. It's sweetened with carrots, and it's a very, very fine way to prepare venison. You can see by the recipes today that there are really delightful alternatives to conventional foodstuffs such as beef, pork, chicken, lamb, fish, all of those good things that I love. But if you're willing to be a little bit adventuresome, you can create some very interesting culinary diversions like we've done today. The spicy buffalo sauerbraten with gingersnap sauce. And notice here on the display these arrowheads. These were from a local field, actually, and these would have been the weapons that the Indians carried into the woods with them to bag buffalo and venison, such as we fix today. I really would have wanted something a little bit bigger than this one, wouldn't you think? This is sort of gopher-sized. Then we prepared this very unusual Michigan bean and Indiana buffalo soup. And finally, the succulent venison roast with carrot rosemary sauce. Because game has always been such a popular and necessary foodstuff throughout the centuries, it's no wonder that many special dishes were manufactured for its service. These Heartland game plates were manufactured during the Victorian period, and notice each one has a different wild bird image on it. They came in sets of 12, and if you are lucky enough to find 12 of them intact, buy them immediately. This is a Wedgwood game pie dish. Look at this beautiful rabbit that's on the lid. This has a simulated pie crust edge, and this is called caneware. In the closing years of Josiah Wedgwood's life, he made artificial pies and tarts in pie crust, or caneware as it's called, and even cakes with jasper icing, which is the white decoration you see on blue and white Wedgwood. This was a period of great famine in England, and game was very scarce, and so was everything else. So some of these artificial pie and tart dishes were instead used for stewed fruit or rice. These dishes at least gave a semblance of plenty to dinner tables, though in reality, it was not a time of plenty at all. To find a game dish with this porcelain insert intact is very unusual and certainly adds to this piece's value. This is a Nellie Custis serving spoon. She was George Washington's adopted daughter. Washington and Josiah Wedgwood were contemporaries, though from different countries. So this serving spoon is of the same period as the game pie dish. The quilt for our game show is appropriately called Bear's Paw, and most of the names in the quilt are men's names. Isn't that great? So until next time, as a goot, eat good.
Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Souder Woodworking, producers of ready-to-assemble furniture for the home and office, America's furniture craftsmen with more than a half-century of experience. By Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles. By Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on.